Hey everybody, final thoughts time for the initiative. And I want to talk about this game so much, but I'm not going to do it alone. With me, of course, is a guy that you know and love, Richard Ham himself. Welcome, Rahdo.
Hey everybody!
So we were both given a copy of this game, so we were both able to play it. Now, I was able to play this game 4-player because a friend of mine who is fully vaccinated came over and we were able, with my roommates, to play this game 4-player. So I have a slightly different experience from you, Rod, who you were only playing it 2-player and solo, I believe.
Yes, just me and Jen, and I did it a bit by myself as well, and I am very jealous of you getting to play this at the full 4-player count.
Well, so I really want to talk to you about this because I loved this game.
Okay.
I really, really enjoyed it. And I want to know how you felt about it. Now, the main reason that I would say I love this game is because it reminded me so much of escape rooms. And I really, really like escape rooms. My friends and I were all about them before the pandemic started. We're talking about going back to them once, we're all vaccinated, once it's safe to do so. But this game, for me, really gave the impression of being in an escape room, and in a different way than all of the games that are billed as escape room games. Because you get all those, there are all those card games and escape room in a box games, and those all have the kind of mechanics of an escape room. They might have physical locks if it's going through that, or they might have, they're making it seem like they have locks or something like that. But those are trying to emulate the things you do in an escape room. This one, I felt, emulated the feel of an escape room. So
that's interesting.
That was the main thing that I really latched onto with this.
So you're saying that the initiative does a better job of capturing the spirit and feel of a real-world escape room than the Unlock series or the Exit series that are literally devoted. I mean,
yes.
What is it about it that does that for you?
So I'll say right up front, I do like the Unlock and Exit series.
Sure.
And I think what they do well. Mm-hmm. But for me, this had that feel. So in the initiative, you are with your friends, you're moving around and you're picking up clues. And then you're using those clues to unlock ciphers. And the ciphers will be on these little cards. They've got these windows that flip over, and it's got this cool little physical aspect to the game. Yeah. And the clues that you find will flip up one of the windows, and that'll give you just a little piece of the puzzle. And you have, it might be a question, it might be a secret phrase you're looking for, or a series of numbers. And in an escape room, one of the most interesting parts for me is cracking codes, cracking ciphers, figuring out these kinds of puzzles. And that is what this game is all about. It's all about cracking these codes.
I see.
Yeah.
That's interesting because what you're saying is, interesting, escape rooms, which are giving you a series of puzzles, often have to be very upfront, say, look, you've found it, you've got the code, you have to deal with this as a cipher, as a puzzle. Whereas board game escape rooms, I think, are wherever possible trying to get away from that. They're trying to obfuscate that and hide it behind apps or, ways that you can combine cards. Whereas this game comes out and says, nope, you've got to figure out this number sequence.
I think the reason for that is because in those escape room in a box games, what they really want to do is get you into the mood of whatever setting they have. This is, you're in a deep sea adventure, not playing deep sea adventure, you're in a submarine or you're in a museum or something like that.
Yeah.
This one, the story is a completely separate thing. Mm-hmm. And it's saying up front, you are playing a game and the game is to crack codes. Yeah. And so it really gets you into kind of just the direct meat of the experience in that sense. And then the story is something completely different.
Yeah.
And the story I really enjoyed with this too.
Yeah.
The story is presented in this comic book. I'll show you the first page and the run through, but it's got this comic book, and you're playing as different teenagers. And if you're playing a 4-player game, what's great is you can choose, which teen you are playing as, and then each player, is that teen for the rest of the throughout the entire campaign. So we took on kind of the mindset of the specific character that we had throughout the comic book. And so the storyline ends up being much more involved in the comic, and then the gameplay is a kind of a different thing, but that helps you to move through the story.
Yeah.
How did you feel reading through the story, 2-player and solo?
Well, certainly, I mean, we don't get that sense that you're talking about of, oh, this is me in the world, because with only 2 players, there's 4 characters no matter what. And, going from mission to mission, we would switch it up and try different combinations of 2 characters, just so I could see how they all feel different and how they function differently. But I will say, I did overall like the story content of this game presented through comic books, which I have a deep abiding love for. Comic books are one of the greatest forms of literature because of the way they capture the written word, but also images and do really interesting stuff. I'm not saying this is the greatest comic of all time. It's just kind of standard stuff. But it does do some very interesting stuff in the storyline that I was completely flabbergasted by. I did not expect it all. It does some interesting tonal shifts throughout, and I know we don't want to get into spoilers right now, but I do want to talk about all of that. So maybe we'll do a spoiler section a little bit later.
We'll get to that, in just a minute, because I agree, and I want to talk about that too. Now, I would say that the gameplay does feel a little bit split between 2 things. You've got the moving around on the map, and trying to find the clues and dealing with some of the other things. The game does progress as you play through the campaign. It adds more complexities to it. So it does feel like the game that you play gets a little bit more involved, but it is fairly straightforward. And it seems a bit, to me, like a vehicle for the code breaking. Now, I don't mind that at all, because I really enjoy code breaking and that puzzle solving aspect to it.
Well, I think that's the number one thing really to evaluate. Putting aside story and narrative and presentation and all that, there are literally 2 games in this box that exist in parallel. The code breaking, cipher cracking, all of that stuff, and with a lot of variety, the different ways they throw it at you. And then there's also this cooperative, almost, I would kind of liken it to a Pandemic crossed with Hanabi style.
I was thinking kind of the same thing. It's very like Pandemic light.
Yes, Pandemic very light. Pandemic to the, forget Pandemic, Forbidden Island level of lightness. Sure. Not even Forbidden Desert. We're talking as light as it gets. And so I am definitely curious, because you got to experience it as a 4-player game with 4 people at all times having different special powers they could use in different combinations, and the fact that it's interesting, in the run-through I watched, you said, well, you're not supposed to, talk about numbers. I assume you played right, and it is Hanabi style, or the mind, where, hey, if you played that 7, what are you playing a 7 for? I need to search. Do you not know I'm in this room? Why are you playing that so high? I've done nothing for 3 turns. I'm trying to get some low cards. What's wrong with you? Did that kind of stuff come up for you guys in a 4-player game? The hidden information co-op along the lines of The Crew or Hanabi and stuff like that?
We kind of split the difference a little bit, to be honest.
Okay.
What we did is we would say, like, I've got high cards.
Right, sure.
Or I can deal with this specific problem if you help me. So we would speak about it in general terms.
Yeah.
We weren't, I would never say, I've got a 12 radio.
Right.
But I would say something like, I've got mostly high cards in my hand, so I'm probably going to use my ability next turn. And that's a thing that, we say this is a straightforward game. I actually really did enjoy that mechanic to it. So the way that it works is, when you're playing cards, when you're taking an action, a basic action, you'll play a card, and you have to play a number higher than the number that was played before it. But if you take the 4th action, you can completely discard all of the cards from that pile and start anew.
Yeah, and that 4th action will never reset.
Yes.
So you have to be careful and smart about that, because if somebody uses a 7 to reset that, it's like, okay, you've just cut in half the number of times we can reset the other decks if we need to.
Exactly.
So you have to be smart about that one,
So I really did enjoy that. And I think playing with 4 players, that becomes something you really have to play around, because when I was playing it like a 2-player version for the run-through, what I noticed, and maybe you felt the same way, is that I didn't feel especially in danger, because I knew that, like, okay, this is my hand, I can play this and this, but I know I'm going to be able to play again after the next round, and the board state is not going to be that different.
Exactly. The reality is, as a 2-player game and a solo, I played it both ways. This part of the game, putting aside the code cracking, it's honestly less of a game and more of a shared activity that we are going through. There isn't much tension. The simple fact is, if you and I are playing together, okay, I've got these cards, I've got maybe all highs or all lows, or I've got a range. Regardless, I know you're only going to put one or two cards down before it comes back to me. If we were playing a 4-player game, there might be 6 more cards that get played before it comes back to me, and that can really put the screws to me. If I had a bunch of lows and suddenly I can't play any of them because everybody filled out the space with only one other player, or even worse, by yourself, it's almost like playing the mind where everybody's got open hands.
Sure.
It was very, very rare that we were ever in a pickle, and that's going all the way through the entire, 12 mission, 13 mission camp, whatever it was. It's
14,
a dozen or so missions. Jen and I, well, I'll be honest. I'll admit a dirty secret. We got about halfway, 2/3 of the way through the campaign, and Jen said, do we have to keep playing this part? I just want to do the code cracking. And what we ultimately did for the last handful, except for the final mission, because I wanted to experience the final mission properly, we said, okay, you know what? Let's just put the board aside and let's just set up the code cracking and we'll just roll dice and see, we unlocked symbol number 6 and then symbol number 12 and then symbol number 3 and symbol number 4. Can we figure this out yet? And that's literally, it got to that point where we were just, as a 2-player game, for relatively seasoned players like us, who are very, very good at Hanabi and, trying to pick, or the crew or whatnot, and picking up on subtle clues when you can't come right out. I mean, this is a big part of what makes Gloomhaven so great. And we played Gloomhaven hundreds of hours. And so we're really, really good at intuiting, well, okay, she did that. She probably still has lows. I don't have to worry about this. Or it doesn't matter. I'll play a high because I'll use my special power and clear that out so she can do whatever she needs. And it was a real bother because, in all honesty, when I got the game, I was more excited about the co-op, the Pandemic Meets Hanabi game. The code breaking, which is really all the escape room stuff, Jen loves that. And she had a great time, and I went along with it, and we worked on the codes together. But we were both really let down as a 2-player game, and again, as a solo player game. And so you did, and you have a little bit, you kind of emulated a 2-player game, and you can definitely confidently say, you want to play this at 4 players.
Yes, I 100% would say that. I think I didn't mind that aspect of the gameplay at 2-player, but again, I only played the one for the run through, and every other play I did was at 4-player, and I absolutely would prefer it at 4.
Yeah.
This
and like
aspect, I said, the cooperative gameplay in that sense, I think is just so much more improved. By having 4 players and having that uncertainty, like you were saying.
Yeah.
So I really do think that is improved. I think that's the best way to play it. 3-player would probably be pretty good too.
I would imagine so.
I do, on top of the gameplay, I also like what I was saying before about connecting to the characters and having this is my character that I'm playing and going through that. And then honestly, it also becomes useful to determine what your seating order is when you have all 4 characters, because some abilities are better when paired with another character's abilities.
Yeah, I know.
So, for example, I was always playing as Prathna.
And she's the search in the room and adjacent rooms?
No, Prathna is the leadership one. I can move other players or myself up to 5 spaces.
Right.
And so we found that if I was directly before either Jenny or Phil, both of which have the ability to either look or pick up clues in adjacent rooms, that ended up being more useful than if they were farther away from me in the turn order. And so it was a small thing. It wasn't game breaking or anything like that, but it was just a slight wrinkle in the strategy that we didn't, that we developed over time while we were playing.
Well, no, I would say it's emblematic of the intended depth of the game. And I could certainly see you'd want Brock to be the last player, because Brock is the one who can basically kind of undo if other players have messed things up by just literally. I think his power is called brute force.
Yeah,
you can say,
force.
Yeah, I don't care what cards are there. I'm going to ignore that and do whatever I want, and then I'm going to clear the card out so it makes it available for other players too. So And that interplay that will definitely come between players. Hey, Jenny will go and she will... No, Jenny's the one who can pick stuff up. So Prada will go and move somebody into place, and then Phil will do a search, and then, I love that, and all of that was gone. It was literally, as a 2-player game and also a solo player game, just kind of this act we were going through. Right, okay, play low cards if we don't have the right cards to play, just play 2 cards and use our special power, because they're all great, they're all useful pretty much all the time. And that was a bit disappointing. However, I do have good news because, like I said, we played through 2/3. We kind of got bored with it. We continued doing the code breaking, and we can come back to the code breaking too. And then here's the interesting thing about the game. There's a dozen or so missions in the main storyline that you play through with the comic book, but then there's like 2 dozen more that come in the box that create a post campaign, which will give you many hours of gameplay. And so we got, and by the time we did that, we had unlocked everything. All that. I mean, you showed a little bit. You showed one secret thing in the run through, which we won't say right now to avoid spoilers. But there are a bunch of other things. Some of them very cleverly hidden in the box, like a good escape room type experience. And by the time we got to okay, I really want to experience this. It feels like I haven't seen everything. And I still couldn't convince Jen to go back and play it some more. So here's my official variant for how you want to play this game as a 2 or a solo game. We played 2 games like this. I haven't tried it solo, but I expect it'll help a lot. As part of setup, you've got your deck of, I think it's 12 cards and 3 suits, so that's 36 cards, right? I believe that's right.
Yeah.
1 to 12. Yeah, so you've got your deck of 36 cards. Divide that deck into all evens and all odds. Shuffle those 2 decks up separately. Put the odd deck on top of the even deck. And as you can imagine, that radically changes things. Because if I'm drawing 4 cards and the only numbers available to me are 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11, and that's the same numbers that are available to you, and you still have to play a higher number than what's come before, suddenly half of the options are gone. And Jen and I found it got a lot more interesting at that point. And we were suddenly running through the entire deck and having to use our powers a lot more. And having to, I'm only going to do 1 turn this turn because I've literally got nothing. And there was a lot more pressure. And I haven't tried it solo, but I suspect it would be a lot more interesting with solo too. That if somebody plays a 7, now all I can do is a 9 or an 11. Whereas in the regular game, I could do an 8, a 9, a 10, 11, or a 12. And that more than halves the amount of options, and that is going to put a lot more pressure. Plus, it means, if there's a 7 out, the only thing to beat that is a 9 or 11. I can see in the discard pile, we've gone through almost all our 9s or 11s. That's over. We might have to reset now. Was this really the smart thing for me to do? And it really buttressed the game up significantly. And we were just doing this literally this morning, a few hours before we had this call, because I knew we were doing the call in the afternoon, and I wanted to give this a try. And the first game, Jim's like, okay, that was a lot better. And the second game, we were literally, it was kind of a nail biter. And it came down to the wire. And we got to the point where, you know what? Okay, we can't risk anything anymore. We cannot push our luck. We have to stop. We do not have enough information to solve this cipher. Can we do it anyway? Which is something that just never happened when we were playing. And I suspect it's the kind of stuff that happened to you in a 4-player game all the time.
It did get a little bit close. Now, my friends and I are fairly experienced at this kind of puzzle solving. Okay. So a lot of the time we were able to solve it pretty quickly. Not like we would always get into peril. Which is when you've gone through the entire the entire draw pile, have to reshuffle the discard pile. So that would always happen. But there were times when we were feeling the screws. Like it was getting pretty tight. Although I will also say that only one time did this happen, but once, I think it was one of the very early missions, we flipped up one window, looked at it for a while, and we're like, I think we know what this is. And we guessed it. And we didn't end the game right away. We kept going to confirm our suspicions, but we were right.
Yep.
Okay, so I think that this is giving you a pretty good sense, and also a great sounding variant if you want to try this 2-player, but it's giving you guys a pretty good sense of how we feel about this game. Now, there are a few more things we want to talk about, but they are going to get into spoiler territory.
Hey everybody, before we go on to the spoiler section, I thought of one more thing I wanted to mention, and I'm going to muscle my way into Shea's video. Hang on. I just wanted to talk about this a little bit. I think it's a great, wonderful little system. There's a fun tactile nature to it. But I have seen some people online saying that they are not a big fan. Maybe because it's a bit fiddly to try to get the things in without revealing the codes or whatever. So, in case you have any pause with this, there is another option. If you go to the website of the publisher for the initiative, link for it is down in the show note, and follow their link called Mission Control, you will find a digital version of this that you can use for all of the main campaign and for the ongoing post-campaign riddles and for a couple of demo ones that were made available, including the one that Shea played with. And there's also a link saying that more ciphers and puzzles will be coming in the future. So I just want to say that's really great. In case you're a player who's wondering, well, hey, does this mean I'm only going to play the game for 30 or 40 times and then I'll have solved all the clues and there's nothing more? The publisher does have plans and they do have a means to release more of them. So that's something you might want to check out. And again, link for it is down in the show notes. And now let's get on to the spoilers.
So if you don't want to get any spoilers, you've got a good sense of how we feel. So now is the time to end. But if you don't mind just a little bit of spoiling some of the really clever decisions that they made or story stuff, that is what we're going to get into right now. So now I know you wanted to talk about the comic book. What is it about the comic book that you felt was really worth noting?
Well, okay. So again, this is... I still don't want to spoil it. Yeah. I'll try to talk generally as much as I can, and if we need to, we'll go deep into it. But so this is the story. This is a very Goonies or Stranger Things style story. You talked about this in the intro.
It's kids on bikes.
Kids on bikes.
Literally in the first or second page,
Yeah, literally the first frame. And of course, they get embroiled in a mystery. There's mysterious characters. They don't know what's going on. There's an equal amount of time focused on these kids, not just as little wannabe sleuth adventurers, but kids.
Yes.
And each one of the 4 kids is literally carrying within them unresolved trauma that they are trying to resolve in their lives.
Yeah, they're going through something.
Yes, they are going through real, and there's nothing supernatural or fantastical about this. They're just these kids. On the surface, they just look like, they're just out having a good old Scooby-Doo and gang adventure. Yeah. But they've got real problems. Mm-hmm. And every once in a while, these issues pop up in the story. And it's presented in the story as literally kind of a dark, malevolent cloud that represents their inner thoughts, where they talk about how they do not feel good about themselves as people, and it really weighs heavily on them. Each one of them has their own little mini thing they're dealing with, and I was shocked the first time I saw one of these. The first time Jenny, I think, was looking in a mirror.
Yes. Yeah.
And this voice in her head of self-doubt just starts telling her, in comic book panels, you're not good enough. They're going to find out. And you're not going to have any friends anymore. And, and it's like, it's weird. The first time you see it is like, wait, is this literally some kind of malevolent spiritual force? But it's very quickly obvious that no.
You realize it's their trauma talking into their anxiety and yeah.
Exactly. And maybe trauma's too hard a word. These are just typical childhood anxieties that are very, very relatable. Every one of them has a different one. And first of all, let me just say, I loved this. I did not expect it at all. And I was really caught flat-footed by it, and I wanted more of that. It elevated the experience so much to not just be about a simple series of mysteries we have to solve, but say, no, these kids have real lives. And I can see myself in them. And I could imagine, Jen and I, we don't have kids, but obviously I think this is going to be a game that a lot of parents play with kids.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I think it has the potential for parents to be able to use this as a very soft and non-judgmental tool to maybe bring out issues that their kids might be facing. If you have, one of the kids is very nerdy, and and that's definitely something that they have to internalize. And if you have a kid who maybe you suspect some of the problems, Phil, to play this out with them is, I think, a great opportunity for communication, and it's just great storytelling, and it goes above and beyond, and I love it. But here's the thing: I hate it too, and I'll leave that as a cliffhanger because I'm curious what you think in general about it.
I was kind of agreeing. I really did enjoy it, and I was surprised by its presence in this comic, and I don't think that you see this kind of narrative in games.
No.
Or in board games. And I really appreciated that they were putting that in. I also thought that this might be the thing that you're going to talk about, but I really liked that it was included. I love that we're presenting the space to talk about things like this, and that these are such relatable concerns that teens definitely struggle with. I know that I had concerns like this when I was in high school. And I think that it's important to have this kind of, representation of seeing anxieties and seeing things like this and dealing with them in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Now, the way that it is dealt with in the comic and in the game,
I think you're going where I was going to. Yeah.
You're given a card, and that card is a puzzle. Now, I think as far as the gameplay goes, I think this is a great addition because this is something that ends up being important to you and your character. That, like, okay, this isn't just a puzzle that I'm solving because it's the game. This is a puzzle that I have a vested interest in solving.
Yeah, well, it's obvious when you get these cards because there's an early scene where all four of the kids go through this, where you're kind of introduced to whatever their anxiety is about, and it's in the background, but then they just go on and have their adventures. Mm-hmm. But then eventually there'll come a point in the story where where their anxiety is directly affecting their situation. And it's at that point the game will say, draw secret card number 52 or whatever it is. Yeah. And you'll look at it and it'll be this puzzle. And then the comic book will say, if you can figure out this puzzle right now, go to page X, otherwise go to page Y. Mm-hmm. Right? So when this came up, that's interesting.
Yeah, when this came up, now we would all, as soon as this came up, we spent as much time as we needed to solve that puzzle because in our minds we were invested in these characters and we were saying there is no way that we're not gonna figure this out.
Right.
So we all did that. So I honestly don't even know because I don't think I looked at like what would have happened. I think for one of the characters I looked at what would have happened if we hadn't solved it. But for most of them we kind of just read through the story. The only thing that I would say is, and I would say this is a minor, very minor issue that I have with it, but it does kind of, I don't want to say trivialize this kind of thing, but it makes it seem like anxieties and depression and the kind of things that which everyone goes through to some degree are easily solved. And that's just not the case. Now, what it does though in this is it, at the very least, it presents these kids as making the first step. And this I think is good. The way that they presented it is a very good way to deal with it, which is that I don't want to say the exact answer to one of them, but it involved just, hey, talk to your friends. Mm-hmm. And that's what a lot of this is. It's you don't need to hide your grief or your anger or your fear. Mm-hmm. It's better if you have friends that you trust and that are supportive, if you can open up to them. So I do, and to what you were saying, like this is an important thing to present to children as saying, this is okay. It's okay to feel like this, and it's okay to talk about it. So I really do like that. But once you solved it, their anxieties were kind of gone.
Because it gets to that inflection point where you can either solve the puzzle or not, and then that's it for that kid. Yeah. And we're going to move on to the next kid and their trauma. And I appreciate, there's only so much they can do within the format they've got. Yeah. They are not writing, an old style choose your own adventure book with, dozens of different branching paths and whatnot. And I do think within the circumstances, the storytelling is handled well because it generally comes down to, hey, you get this puzzle. It's self-contained on one card as a group. If you can figure it out, you go to a page where what is modeled to the reader is a good coping mechanism that helps. And I love that. I love that, maybe you have a kid who deals with some of these things and you can see how that kid deals with it in the storyline. And you're right. It's certainly not going to completely wipe that clean, although it does kind of effectively become no longer an issue in the story. But more importantly, it leads by example. And I love that. Here's my problem with it. Okay. The four cards you get for these four things, as far as Jen and I are concerned, were the four hardest things in the game to actually solve. They were, as often as not, completely unrelated from every other type of puzzle that's in the game. Yeah. They required, in some cases, for our experience, really big leaps of logic. And what's interestingly, if you can't figure it out right then, and Jen and I, we'd get them, we'd think about it, like, I have no idea what to do with this. I literally cannot figure this out. These four cards, literally, we could only figure out one of them. by the end of the story. So 3 of them were never resolved. And it's a very standard thing in escape rooms, board game ones and real world ones that, that's a real problem. But you know what? Probably we just need to put this down and we'll come back to it later when we get more information and we can solve it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we thought. And we got to the end of the game and we're like, we never resolved any of these kids. We only resolved one kid's trauma, and we went back. And this is even weirder. There was never any kind of syllabus or hint guide or anything. I just had to backwards figure out, well, okay, if we could have figured it out, we go to the page, and the page says, if you didn't figure out this was the thing, don't read the page. I'm like, okay, well, now we know what the answer is. Maybe we can figure it out ourselves how we were supposed to solve this. Yeah. And even still, one of the 3, we were not able to, I don't think we ever figured out how to solve Phil's. I'm still glad I saw Phil's resolution, and this was all handled so haphazardly. Honestly, it's almost like, if you think in video game terms, resolving these childhood anxiety issues were treated like puzzle boss fights. They were the toughest things in the game, and I can imagine how frustrating it would be because I cared more about resolving those anxiety issues than anything else in this game. Then the mysterious stranger and the mansion and how do we find out who's the power behind it. All of that stuff paled in comparison to the pressure that one of the kids felt because of their parents expecting more from them. It's like. And we got nothing about it.
I totally get what you're saying. It's you have one opportunity.
Exactly.
And if you don't get it, then you'll never come back to it. And I do wish there was a point where you could come back to it later in the story. I agree with that. Now you're saying that those were the hardest puzzles for you, and
for us,
a couple of them,
yeah,
I definitely agree they were harder, but mainly it's because they were different.
Exactly.
All the other puzzles are ciphers, they're code crackers, but these occasionally were different. But they also reminded me again of puzzles that you might see in an escape room.
Very much so. Yes, there were definitely some that I felt like could have been put in the next, unlock or exit the game.
Absolutely. They followed that sort of experience a little bit better. So in a more traditional sense, I guess. They are difficult puzzles. I agree with you with that.
And maybe it helped that you had 4 brains noodling over it. Where Jen and I, we just basically got frustrated very quickly and I want to solve this and just hopefully the game will revisit this at some point. And so we just walked away from them. And so it was very frustrating at the end to be in that situation where, nope, they just didn't care about resolving these kids' issues. These kids are just, still carrying these things around. And honestly, you said, you're right. These are pulled straight out of a Deckscape or any number of other games. And all those other games, they always provide if you're stuck, here's the clue card. Yeah. And it's weird. There were clue cards for other things because there are some other main storyline beats that require you to come up with some big, puzzle solution outside of the co-op game. And those ones all had, if you can't figure this out, go to page 32 and we will give you a step-by-step, well, here's your first clue, here's your second clue, here's your third clue.
I think the reason for that is because, you needed to solve the puzzle in order to progress the story.
Otherwise you're stuck, yeah. Whereas
the other things were the other things were like side quests.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I get that from a gameplay design, but yeah, like you're saying, it's the most, that resonated with us so much.
Yeah.
That's why we were never gonna move on until we had figured it out.
Yeah.
So there was, I think, 1 or 2 where we were kind of beating our brain against it. But like you said, because we had 4 people, and that's, I think, a thing that's true in escape rooms too. A lot of times people bring in different forms of expertise, different ways of looking at things, and that really helped.
Which I think goes to show that really at the heart of it, the initiative is, first and foremost, designed to be a 3 or 4 player game. Yeah, and it really feels like solo and 2-player game are an afterthought. Both because of what we talked about in the non-spoiler section, where there's just not as much pressure and threat when there's only half as many players and therefore twice as many cards we have access to. So we just are nowhere near as much danger. But then also throwing some of the most pivotal and impactful and meaningful moments and basically, hiding them behind a gate of really some of the toughest, most outside the box. I mean, literally, after we're done with filming, you're going to have to explain to me how we solve Phil's. Because I know what the answer is, and it makes no sense to me whatsoever. And I'm sure, like with every one of these, with a regular escape room, you read the clue when you're stuck, and and sometimes you say, okay, we should have gotten that. And other times you say, yeah, there's no way any human being in history could have ever figured that out. But at least it's there. We walked away what could have been the biggest shining moment of this game. And I think it will be for a lot of players, maybe at higher player counts, or who don't make the mistake of thinking, oh, this must be impossible to solve now.
Yeah.
We must need more information. We'll get that later.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, because that's what happened.
Yeah.
And
Every puzzle that you approach in that way can be solved
exactly.
immediately.
Yeah. And no more information is coming later.
Yes.
At all.
Yeah.
So spend the time. It's worth it. And that was actually fairly spoiler free without getting into. I think I went a little.
That's true.
Talk specifics, but still.
There are other spoilers we could give. I think we're going to avoid them. I will just say that there are some very inventive ways that this game has hidden information from you.
Yes.
And when we found them, there were two big things. And when we found both of those, we were just kind of blown away. Like, I think that's just excellent. Just physical game design.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. Yeah,
but
I haven't seen stuff this clever since the early days of Exit.
Sure. Yeah. All right. So I think we've given a pretty good final thoughts about the initiative. There's definitely things to think about. We definitely say that it's better with a higher player count, but there is some really interesting stuff going on.
If you ever get the chance, I assume you're keeping the game. Definitely,
absolutely.
Try if you're ever going to play it just with Nick. Try my 2-player variant. I think I'm curious. I think it would be a much better way to play solo. It's almost pointless to play this game solo. I mean, the card game, the card play, there's no threat whatsoever if you know everything that's going to get played.
Yeah. So thank you all for watching, and check out the initiative if you like a good code breaker kind of puzzle game, and especially if you got 3 or 4 people to play it with. And that is going to be all, folks. Thank you all so much for watching. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.